Okay. So what I will do is I'm going to announce as I flip to the next slide, and you can hit F5 if you're already in Internet Explorer. If you want to go and jump into either of the other two Internet providers that Ruthan just mentioned, do that and catch up with us. And again, this is recorded. It will be posted and sent out to you, and also the deck itself will be. I'm sorry for the disconnect if you're not seeing what I am seeing. But let's troop ahead, folks. And again, anyone can follow up, by the way, with me. You'll have my contact information. You can follow up with any questions that you have. Let's talk about the directives themselves, and then let's talk about how they're going to be enforced. We'll take them in order. In 2018, we had 9 directives. In the late 2018, which technically is part of the OFCCP's 2019 year, but all in calendar year 2018, we got 12 directives. Effectively, we got a directive a month. Some of them fit very much in these themes of transparency, efficiency, collaboration, rule of law, and increased enforcement around disability. Those were the themes that I laid out earlier. The first directive is the use of predetermination notices. Emphasis on the syllable pre and predetermination. In years past, the OFCCP would conduct an investigation, and if they believe they found discrimination or other non-compliance, the way you typically learned about it as the employer was in a notice of violation, which immediately says, we have found discrimination or non-compliance, we demand that you come into compliance and give us a lot of back pay, and give job offers to the affected class of minorities or females, or whites or males, where we found discrimination, or change your policies and your practices in the following way to get into compliance. And that's how we worked with the OFCCP. They went off on their own into their laboratory. They cooked up what they found in the audit. The door was closed to the laboratory, and then they brought out the smoking beaker of the notice of violation and pushed it across the table to us and said, here, violations, fix them. One big step forward in terms of collaboration and transparency is now OFCCP, whenever they are poised to conclude that there is discrimination, not a technical violation like listing your jobs with state job services, but if there's a discrimination finding, that OFCCP is required to issue a predetermination notice telling you, hey, we think there's discrimination here, but this is our predetermination, so we are going to give you an opportunity to respond to this and tell us whether you think we're wrong, and if we're wrong, tell us why, and we're going to take it under advisement. Sometimes the whole issue may go away based on your response. If you get a predetermination notice, stop. Speak with your counsel, in-house or outside. OFCCP is giving you a telegraph sign that we think there's discrimination here, but you get a bite at the apple to tell us why we're wrong. We misunderstood your employment process, your hiring, your pay process. We misunderstood how your managers administer it. Dig in and respond substantively to the predetermination notice. Try to avoid any further findings. That's number one. And I'm going to put these each under themes. That's transparency and collaboration. The second has to do with efficiency. And anyone on our call today who believes they're a government contractor, by the way, I assume all of you that have joined us today acknowledge that you're a government contractor. Otherwise, you have some bizarre curiosity about the OFCCP's regulations, which is still okay. You can come along for the fun. But I'm going to operate on the assumption that you're a government contractor. Well, here is the deal. If you believe you're a contractor as a healthcare employer by being a subcontractor under TRICARE. TRICARE is a medical insurance program that extends benefits to military, to veterans, to family members of the military and veterans. If you believe that you're covered solely based on TRICARE funding that you've received, stick around for the rest of the webinar if you will, but you don't need to, because this directive extends a moratorium saying that OFCCP will not enforce affirmative action and EEO regulations against TRICARE subcontractors, and we expect a proposal middle of this year or later in this year that will permanently carve out TRICARE subcontractors and perhaps some other contractors in the healthcare industry. We will carve them out, and they will no longer have any type of OFCCP obligations. You still can't discriminate under EEO rules, but you don't have specific affirmative action obligations. Okay, number 3, religious exemptions. This one's really interesting because how many of us know this year? I'm going to give out a gold sparkly star. You got to play on the honor system. Raise your hand if you know that right now under federal law, except for government contractors, under federal law, there is no legal protection for LGBT status or rights. There is under many states, there is under many cities, but there is no protection explicitly in the law for LGBT status. Now, EEOC interprets what we call Title VII law to, on the basis of sex, that's the language, to include LGBT, but for instance, the Department of Justice does not agree with that, and many federal courts have not. That may be decided ultimately by the Supreme Court of the U.S., but as of right now, the only explicit legal protection for LGBT under federal law is if you're a government contractor. President Obama issued an executive order which said that people LGBT, and not just, so we're not just talking about those sexual orientation, but based on gender identity as well, that they are protected against discrimination. However, we also have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act passed by Congress and recent Supreme Court decisions interpreting it, which allow, for example, an employer to invoke their religious beliefs with respect to certain actions that they would otherwise be required to do. So I want you to think about this, the tension between LGBT rights and protections and religious beliefs and those legal protections. What if you have a manager who is, for example, a devout member of a religious organization or a religious order that is opposed to homosexuality? And your manager says, I will not supervise, I will not advance in employment, I'm not going to promote these individuals because of their sexual orientation. But we also have the sexual orientation protections that President Obama put in place. So this directive says where there is a tension, auditors are required to reconcile or to seek to balance the interests of religious freedom in addition to LGBT rights. The working assumption under this directive is that most compliance officers will err on the side of LGBT protections, and it trumps religious conviction and religious rights. This directive says you have to strike a balance. You need to think about this within your organization, particularly if you have anyone come to you and say, I have a religious objection to the following with regard to a colleague, someone I'm interviewing, an applicant, someone you've asked me to supervise, promote, or work with based on my religious objection. So if there's, again, speak with your counsel about that if you're dealing with any kind of situation, because there's no clear answer. You got to balance it. All right. This one gets really interesting, and we're going to dig down into the next one in just a moment. Focused reviews. Hundreds of you, contractors around the country, are going to undergo focused reviews this year. In fact, they're going to start very soon. Those focused reviews are going to be audits, but they're going to be, rather than a traditional full-blown audit focusing on your full range of EEO obligations, this is going to be specific to a particular area of your compliance. It's either going to be based on 11246, that's the executive order, protecting based on race or gender. 503 is the statute regarding individuals with disabilities, or VEVRA. VEVRA is our veterans protections. We are going to see, I spoke with Craig Aline about this in the last few weeks, we're going to see at least 500 focused reviews beginning over the next few months. Every review, and by the way, that's going to start almost exclusively with 503, with individuals with disabilities, where that is Director Aline's particular focus or passion. Every one of these audits is going to result in an on-site. It is going to be initiated against your corporate location or corporate headquarters, where they're then going to delve down into the broader organization. Folks, if you've been through audits in the last couple of years and it closed quickly and easily with no on-site, no follow-up, that's not this. We are going to see a deep dive here because Director Lean believes that employers very often are giving short shrift, in particular, to individuals with disabilities and perhaps to disabled veterans and other veterans. I'm going to come back on focus reviews in just a moment. All right, compensation. I have cases going on right now, folks, where the OFCCP has demanded $12 million, $33 million, $80 million, and $400 million. These are cases that are not yet finalized in any way, but all of them have something in common, which is OFCCP is going after what they believe is massive systemic pay discrimination at employers. And we have a new directive that gives compliance officers guidance as to how to do a much deeper and broader dive into pay. Here's the bottom line. You are going to see a massive increase in audits starting over the next couple of months, and every one of those audits is going to include a deep dive into what your pay looks like on a systemic basis. My recommendation to you, second practical takeaway, is if you haven't already conducted a proactive pay analysis, don't wait for the audits to come. If you haven't looked at your pay proactively, then do that now. Do it under privilege. Work with your in-house attorney or outside counsel on it. Make sure we do it in a robust statistical way. The good news about this directive is that you can read through it and it will provide you with specific guidance as to how the OFCCP is going to conduct their analyses. We can mimic or we can mirror that methodology in order to move things forward. All right, some good news. I mentioned collaboration. Well, OFCCP is poised to put in place two very powerful recognition or awards programs, which are going to recognize separately employers with exemplary individual with disability, diversity, and inclusion programs. What have you done that's innovative in the D&I space or affirmative action space for individuals with disabilities? What has been effective? What has moved the needle? In addition, there will be a separate recognition and award program for general diversity, effectiveness, outreach, recruitment, and results. So one will be specific to individuals with disabilities, Craig Lean's passion, and one will be more broader for diversity efforts generally. What is the positive outcome? Well, if you nominate, you can self-nominate or be nominated for these awards. If you're nominated and you receive the award from OFCCP, you will get, as they plan it right now, a 5-year moratorium on audits. And that's a big deal because, as I mentioned, in an era over the next couple of years where we're going to see far more audits, getting a moratorium for 5 years would be a really good thing. All right, here's another one that's huge. OFCCP is moving in the direction of a verification program, meaning you as an employer or contractor are going to have to affirmatively verify each year, basically a check-the-box certification, that you have all of your affirmative action plans in place and up to date. This is a big deal, folks, because OFCCP estimates that there are about 150,000 contractor locations around the country, and that only some percentage, maybe a relatively small percentage, prepare their affirmative action plans on a proactive basis. Rather, many employers don't know or don't acknowledge that they're covered. I'm going to give you an example in a moment where you may fall into that. Or they know secretly that they're covered, but they only respond when they get an audit letter. Well, this year the OFCCP hopes to do 3,500 audits out of about 150,000 contractor locations. Do the math on that, folks. What that's telling us is only about 2 to 2.5% of the contractor universe is going to be selected for audits. That percentage which waits till they get audited before they prepare affirmative action plans, they generally don't have to prepare those plans. Craig Lean has made it his mission to ensure that all government contractors prepare plans for all of their locations and verify it. I do want to mention, because I get this question every day from new clients. Many of you believe that you only have to prepare affirmative action plans for the location that holds the government contract or the division or the subsidiary. So for instance, if you're a larger organization, you have 20 locations, and 2 of those locations are under a particular division that holds the government contract, you only need to prepare affirmative action plans for that division of those 2 locations. Not so. You have a definite obligation to prepare affirmative action plans throughout the entire organization. Affirmative action obligations run upstream and downstream throughout the entire larger corporate family, regardless which entity or subsidiary or division holds the particular government contract or subcontract. Go back and look at that on your end, because sometime soon you are going to need to affirmatively verify or certify that you are in compliance for all of your locations, not just those that have the government contract. And oh, by the way, Craig Lean has said that this is a journey from no verification at all to verification and certification to his ultimate goal is to have some type of summary meaning that annually, if you have 20 locations, his vision within the next few years is that you're going to submit summary AAP data, applicant data, compensation data, and so forth in summary format so that the OFCCP can demonstrate, they can ensure that you're in compliance. Okay. Transparency in OFCCP compliance activities. This is a big one. Read this one if you get audited. You can read it now. By the way, all these directives are available on the OFCCP's website. You can ask if you want to reach out to me. I'm happy to share whatever you need here, but go to their website. This directive says OFCCP needs to be far more transparent at the earliest stages in their audits, telling you what they think they may have found, telling you where the areas are where there are flags, so not asking for your entire applicant flow, but only those job groups or job titles where there are flags. That's an example of transparency. They're supposed to tell you what facts they have that support any preliminary conclusions. This is a real change, and I've yet to see this, by the way, too much in the field. Your job is to understand these directives in your audits and say to the OFCCP, hey, what about transparency? When they come back to you and say, we want all of this data and documents, third practical takeaway for you, rely on this directive and say, I'm going to point you to this spot right here where it says, before you ask for any additional information after we've submitted our initial affirmative action plan, if you want additional information beyond what we call the desk audit, you need to show us why that information is necessary. What have you found, OFCCP? And in what specific area? Are you looking at our data right? Have you run your numbers correctly? Do you understand our compensation or our hiring or outreach and recruitment process? These are what lawyers call threshold questions, preliminary questions to help you push the OFCCP and narrow their focus or perhaps even make it go away. This transparency is a big deal. And so is the next one. It's an ombuds service. Basically, it's like a citizen's advocate or contractor advocate within the OFCCP. If you believe you have been treated unfairly or not within the law, not within the regulations, you're going to be able to go to the ombuds service, which acts almost as a neutral within the OFCCP, and to not necessarily represent only your interests, but represent your interests as well as the OFCCP's and seek to balance those. By the way, OFCCP has recently posted a job looking for an ombuds director. So if you're interested in a career change, you may want to work for Craig Lean and help him with this ombuds service. All right, I'm on slide 12. Last 3 directives are actually the first 3 directives of 2019 fiscal year. They all took place in 2018, but the fiscal year starts October 1 of 2018. Compliance review procedures, the OFCCP has said they are going to become far more efficient, and we're going to touch on this more in a moment. Early resolution procedures is another one, and we're also going to touch on that in a second, so let's come back to it. And finally, opinion letters and help desk. Let me tell you about that. OFCCP, and I've given you more detail in the slide deck, OFCCP has created a new mechanism where with all these new rules and directives and uncertainty, you can ask for an opinion letter from the OFCCP, not during an audit, long before an audit ever comes, you can say, hey, I'm thinking about how to conduct effective outreach for individuals with disabilities. I was thinking about doing X and Y and Z. OFCCP, do you see this as being in compliance? Can you provide us with an opinion as to whether this lines up with your regulations and your rules, and also provide us with guidance that you have in this area? On compensation, I want to conduct a proactive pay analysis, and I'm considering grouping the workforce in this way. OFCCP, is this in compliance with your regulations? There will be a robust opinion letter process, so as you move into this new set of rules and try to understand it, you also have the option, I'm using it, of reaching out to OFCCP and seeking opinion letters. There also will be a much more effective help desk, a 1-800 type help desk where you can ask questions. All right. I want to spend a few minutes just digging into a few of these directives that require further understanding. First, your focused reviews. I mentioned to you that there will be 500 of them. By the way, to focus your attention on focused reviews, OFCCP will post, sometime within the next couple of weeks, a listing of 3,500 contractor locations that are slated for audit this year. I want you to think about that number, 3,500. Last year, the OFCCP conducted approximately 780 audits. 780 audits last year, 3,500 audits this year. It's an increase of close to 5 times as many. If you've avoided the audit letter the last couple of years, well, congratulations. But the numbers game tells us that many more of you are going to get audits this year, and 500 of those 3,500 are going to be focused reviews, and they're going to start with a big wave of Section 503, or individual with disability. I mentioned the OFCCP will go on site every time. They're going to conduct a comprehensive review within that specific area, individuals with disabilities. And by the way, I just went back and forth with the OFCCP's national office. I'm pulling it up as we speak. OFCCP just got approval for the new scheduling letter or audit letter specific to focused reviews for 503 for individuals with disabilities. I'm looking through the letter right now. If you want a copy of the OFCCP's approved abridged scheduling letter just for focus reviews, you can shoot me an email and I'd be happy to share it. But here are a couple of things that I think are especially important for you to know. Number one, and look at the bottom bullet on the current slide. I'm on slide 13. OFCCP in the letter has said, we will closely, I'm reading the language now, we will closely assess the effectiveness of outreach and recruitment efforts that were intended to identify and recruit individuals with disabilities. Now let's stop there. Assess the effectiveness. You know, for the longest time when we thought about the idea of outreach, or what we call good faith efforts, we generally thought of it as what I call the push-out approach. Push-out meaning, okay, I'm going to identify 10 disability recruitment sources. I am going to post my jobs with those disability recruitment sources. I have 20 openings this year, and boom, my work is done. I've pushed out those job openings to those sources. However, what the OFCCP regulations say, remember, regulations are the rule of law. OFCCP 503 disability regulations, which were revised in 2013, say, employer, the measure of your compliance is not the push out. It is instead the pull in effectiveness of your listings, postings, outreach, recruitment sources. I know that JOBfindah, by the way, does an effective job of helping employers track not just all the various sources that jobs were listed with, but where did applicants come from? So for example, if I have 2 disability recruitment sources and I list all of my 20 jobs with those 2 sources, if you're measuring me on the push out, they are equally effective. Each of them received my job openings, done. We are all done. But one of the recruitment sources gave us 30 applicants for our 20 openings, none of whom were interviewed and none of whom were hired. The other recruitment source also gave us 30 applicants, 8 of whom were interviewed, 4 of whom were hired. That is a much more effective recruitment source, the second one, in giving us qualified candidates to help us move the needle on disability representation. This notion of assessing the effectiveness of your outreach is critically important for us to do in advance, not waiting for OFCCP. Because if we simply say, look at all of the outreach we did, and put our hands on our hips in a self-satisfied way, my work is done here, look at all these recruitment sources, it misses your obligation to assess the pull-in effectiveness. Let's go back as a fourth practical takeaway, and let's make sure that you are looking at your recruitment sources and seeing not just whether they give you applicants, but how do those applicants for each of those sources do within your employment process. For sources that don't get the job done, that don't give you applicants or don't give you good applicants, then consider losing those. For those that help you move the needle in terms of advancement within the process, interviews and ultimate hires, let's accentuate those relationships. That's just one example. But if you want to get a copy of the letter so you can start figuring out how to respond to these focused reviews, and again, OFCCP is going to post on their website within the next couple of weeks the 3,500 locations, including those 500 that are slated for focused reviews. If you want to get prepared once you see that list, then come back and I'll give you the letter. All right. We're going to do maybe later this year a deep dive into compensation and the OFCCP's approach to analyzing pay. But suffice to say this, I mentioned it earlier, do not wait. You cannot wait for the OFCCP to come knocking on your door with an audit. Certainly if you're on that 3,500 posting list on their website in a few weeks, then let's get ahead of it. Conduct proactive analyses. OFCCP is going to use what are called pay analysis groups in their audits, which often means they'll look at your job groups or your EO1 categories. Think about grouping all of your EO1 category professionals together, top to bottom. Let's say you have 500 professionals, and just putting them in a single group to compare. I would argue, most would argue who are lawyers, that that is not consistent with Title VII law. And OFCCP, as I mentioned, said they're going to abide by the rule of law. They're not a law creation agency, they're a law enforcement agency. In this area, which is quite controversial, OFCCP has decided that they can go very broad in comparing all your professionals, but the law seems to indicate otherwise. Conduct proactive analyses, be ready to explain your pay system, and also be ready to diplomatically push back with the OFCCP if they're over broadly grouping non-similarly situated employees. I mentioned compliance verification. OFCCP is going to move in the direction of you certifying that you have all plans in place. Don't say you have a plan in place if you don't. It's penalty of perjury, and there are potentially even criminal consequences of that. The bottom line, though, is we're going to see a verification process within the year, and then probably a summary submission that I mentioned within the next couple of years after that. Okay, I mentioned OFCCP being more efficient with compliance reviews. They're moving, in effect, from what they used to call active case enforcement, which was a deep dive in every audit, to a much more efficient process where they're going to quickly look at your app flow, your hires, your promos, terms, your comp, those sets of data trends to see where there are red flags. They'll also probably look at disability and veterans in some aspect of that. And they're going to get in and get out quickly. That's how they're going to do 3,500 audits this year. But if your app flow or promotions or compensation, one of those narrow areas they focus on, if those show red flags when you submit the plans, then you can expect there you're going to be prioritized for a deep dive. Here's my rule of thumb. I have a lot of employers submit plans to the OFCCP. It is very rare that the plans that I work with an employer on show statistical red flags, because even if it starts with red flags, there are perfectly appropriate, legal, legitimate ways to refine the data, to regroup the workforce, to decide to present only at the job title level rather than at the job group level. Those are just a few simple examples. Do not submit a plan with flags and then just close your eyes, cross your fingers, and hope for the best, because OFCCP's new efficiency will get employers out quick and easy if they don't have flags, but if they have statistical red flags, then you can expect a deep dive. So be aware of where those flags are, and see what we can do to refine them pre-submission. Early resolution procedures, slide 17. The bottom line here is, I'm going to tell you, don't do it. Check with your counsel on it. But this is a directive that, to me, is dead on arrival. In essence, what it says is, if the OFCCP has found discrimination, then they will seek to broaden it to the organization as a whole, not just that establishment, and move quickly to a company-wide resolution. And you're going to be able to avoid audits for the next couple of years, but you're going to have to report on, usually annually, on the entire organization. I don't see this as being effective. In fact, if you have a situation where the OFCCP proposes early resolution of a discrimination finding, certainly speak with your counsel or give me a shout on it. I'll give you some thoughts, but this is one that I think employers need to be very careful of. We spoke about opinions and help desk. These are very positive, and let's take advantage of particularly the OFCCP being willing to issue opinion letters in advance of any type of audit. If you are putting a new ATS system in place, if you are changing your self-ID format for race and gender and vested disability, if you are considering a revamp of your outreach and recruitment process, consider using this opinion letter mechanism with a help desk to OFCCP's input. All right, let's just wrap up with this. OFCCP requested for the current fiscal year $89 million. That was under their previous director. Congress decided to give the OFCCP almost $104 million. I want you to think about your department. Is there any situation where you ask for X amount of budget for your department and your organization gives you 15 to 20% more than that? OFCCP has a big budget to work with. They will come on site as frequently as they want. There's no travel constraints budget-wise. By the way, now that the shutdown is over, OFCCP has been open for business during the shutdown. The Department of Labor was funded separately. The bottom line is we saw 780 audits last year. We'll see 3,500 audits this year. They are going to be posted on the OFCCP's website for all to see. Not just you. It'll be for your employees, for plaintiffs' counsel, for unions, for the press, for your competitors. Anyone who wants to see will see that you're getting audited at these 5 locations, and you may get follow-on as a result of it. It's critical that you get ready for those audits. I mentioned the focused reviews, 500, all starting with corporate headquarters, all resulting on an on-site. And here's how I will leave you. The advance notice on the OFCCP's website, slide 21, folks. The advance notice gives you the gift of time. OFCCP will not initiate the actual audit for at least 45 days after, and then you get another 30 days from the time you get the audit letter. That gives you effectively 75 days, or about 2.5 months, before the audit letter comes. Once this is posted on the OFCCP's website next month, use the gift of time. Prepare your plans in advance. Know these new rules about disability, compensation, other aspects of what you do. Let's make sure we get ahead of the game. If you get your plans audit ready without flags, then under the new, more efficient approach, you're going to get in and get out and get those audits done very quickly. If you do not use the gift of time and take the cross your eyes, close your fingers, and hope for the best approach and submit your plans, we are going to see more hurt for contractor community this year than we have many years past. I will leave it with this. Craig Lean believes this year, 2019, will be the biggest fiscal recovery year. OFCCP hopes to bring back well over $50 million in what they believe is discrimination. That will be a record for the agency. Don't be among those who are giving the OFCCP $50 to $100 million this year. Let's get ahead of it. Let's be proactive, and let's know the new rules. And with that, Robin, whenever you're ready, if there are questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, many thanks, Mickey, for such a great presentation, very informative. So let's get to the Q&A, and if we want to continue, we can do that, or we can take the questions later on. So I'll go back here. Can you see some of these questions, Mickey? We can read them through. Here it says, from Paul Cashon, given the rule of law emphasis, can federal contractors use OFCCP's infographic and should they stick with it for 4212 definition? Can you see that? Yeah.
Yes, and I can't, for whatever reason, I'm unable to see it, but I'm able to work from it. I'm very familiar with the infographic. The answer is yes. You can use whatever the OFCCP has put out as a defense, as an explanation as to why you did what you did. However, remember the hierarchy I set for you earlier. Constitution, laws passed by Congress, and regulations carry the force of law. Everything below that is sub-regulatory, it is guidance, it is suggestions, and OFCCP frequently argues away from their own infographic, from their own FAQs on their website, and from their own directives. So certainly use the power of persuasion. And by the way, the OFCCP has said if you submit a question to the help desk or an opinion letter, and OFCCP provides a response, even though it's sub-regulatory, it does not carry the force of law, OFCCP has directed compliance officers to take your efforts into account based on what OFCCP said on a sub-regulatory basis. So there is opportunity to seek to persuade OFCCP based on their own documents, but it is real. I know I'm a lawyer geeking out on you guys a little bit on this. It is really important to understand that which is sub-regulatory, below the line, and that which is regulation and above the line. It's only above the line that carries the force of law.
Good. Then there is another question, Vicky, that says, given the notion of focused reviews, what are the advantages, disadvantages for contractors that separate legal entities at the same work site into separate independent AAPs, as opposed to those who combine the legal entities at one work site into one AAP?
I think it's a wonderful question, and I'll give you the short answer, but whoever asked that if you want to discuss further, because this is a very real-world issue. OFCCP's regulations, remember, force of law, a regulation, says you have an obligation to prepare a plan for your quote-unquote establishment. So you've got a bricks-and-mortar location with 900 employees, 500 in one line of business or division, 400 in another. And even though they're under the same corporate family and in the same establishment, physical location, they operate completely independently, separate HR processes, separate comp and recruitment systems, and so forth. I will often create separate plans for those two workforces within the same quote-unquote establishment. It recognizes the reality of our organizational structure. It's just a more meaningful way to look at our workforce. OFCCP at times will push back and say, no, it's an establishment that's got to all be in one location, all one AAP. But I'm almost always successful with OFCCP, showing them that if we're not subdividing the workforce just to avoid compliance, but rather to enhance compliance by making these plans more meaningfully aligned with our organizational structure, that generally is a winning argument. Very good question. Rathan, I know we're just about at time. I'm happy to take one more question, and if there are questions unanswered, folks can reach out to me or whatever you think is the best way to get us questions.
Yeah, and we have the questions, so I'll send them to you anyway, and we can definitely respond. We can also create on our website some of these questions and answers. So no problem. Yeah. So let's take one more question. I'm just going, in order. So the next question is, 5/18/18 OFCCP release said TRICARE will also now apply to Veterans Affairs Health Benefits Program providers. How did the VA-HBP get incorporated into this? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the question, just for everyone on the call, just so you know, goes beyond affirmative action and OFCCP compliance obligations. Just very quickly, there has been a movement afoot to improve veterans' medical services. There is a clear perception that there's been deficiencies in veteran medical services, and this administration has taken a number of steps to address that issue, hopefully in coordination. And so the questioner just asked about how this was folded in, something outside of OFCCP land. The answer is those are just a few things that the administration is doing. There is real talk about outsourcing quite a bit of what has been VA hospital services, dedicated specifically to by VA hospitals, and instead allow those individuals to go and use, in essence, an insurance type program to go into private sector hospitals. So that's just another example. So the answer to your question is, even though somewhat beyond the scope of OFCCP, OFCCP's efforts for veterans is just one piece of a broader puzzle to improve medical services for veterans.
Okay, so there are many questions. I'm just showing the questions if somebody wants to take them, but as I said, I will take the questions, compile them, give them to Mickey, and hopefully we'll be able to post something on this that you can check, or you can obviously go back to Mickey with some of these questions. But we'll try our best to compile them so that this can benefit the whole audience. So once again, Mickey, if you don't have anything for now, I wanted to thank you again on behalf of JOBfindah and on behalf of all our users and everybody on the call. And I want to tell all of you that please do stay tuned for our announcement for our next webinar. And as Mickey mentioned, sometime in the middle of the year, we'll also try to organize with Mickey, a webinar on compensation. So thank you very much. That concludes our webinar today.
Thanks so much, folks.